Imagine a place larger than every country on Earth combined. A place where no nation officially owns the land. No borders, no police, no government, just open space. This place covers more than half of the planet, and yet somehow it is still controlled. Not by one country, but by a handful of them. The world's oceans are often described as international territory, a massive expanse belonging to everyone, and therefore to no one. But that description is misleading, because despite what maps might suggest, the oceans are not a lawless wilderness. In reality, most of the world's ocean is quietly controlled through narrow shipping lanes, through international legal zones, through military presence, through infrastructure hidden beneath the water, and most importantly, through geography. Because controlling the ocean does not require owning it, it only requires controlling the places ships have no choice but to pass through. And once those choke points are controlled, the rest of the ocean becomes surprisingly easy to influence. But to understand how that works, it helps to start with a strange question. If the ocean belongs to everyone, why do ships follow the same routes every single day? When most people look at a world map, the oceans appear simple, just enormous blue spaces separating continents. But from the perspective of global logistics, the ocean is anything but empty. It is a network of routes, corridors, and choke points connecting the global economy. Every year, roughly 90% of global trade moves by sea. Food, cars, electronics, and energy. Nearly everything that moves between continents spends part of its journey on a ship. And despite the vastness of the oceans, most of these ships follow very specific paths. This is because the ocean is not equally navigable everywhere. Ships prefer predictable routes that minimize distance, avoid dangerous weather, stay within range of ports, and most importantly, pass through the narrowest possible shortcuts. These shortcuts are known as maritime choke points, and they are the reason controlling the ocean is possible in the first place. Because once ships are forced through narrow passages, the ocean suddenly becomes much smaller. There are only a few places on Earth where the ocean naturally funnels ships into tight corridors. These locations are narrow passages between land masses that ships must pass through to reach their destinations efficiently. Some of them are only a few miles wide, but they control enormous portions of global trade. Take the Strait of Hormuz. At its narrowest point, it is only about 21 miles wide, yet this single passage carries roughly 1/5 of the world's oil supply. Every tanker leaving the Persian Gulf must pass through this strait. That means any country capable of controlling or threatening these narrow waterways has influence over a massive portion of global energy supply. Then there is the Strait of Malacca. Located between Malaysia and Indonesia, this corridor connects the Indian Ocean to the Pacific. It is the primary shipping route between Asia and Europe. At some points, it's only 1.7 miles wide, yet nearly 100,000 ships pass through it every year. If this strait were blocked, ships would need to travel thousands of miles around Indonesia instead. That would dramatically increase shipping costs across the entire global economy. Another critical choke point sits between Africa and the Arabian Peninsula, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. This passage connects the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean and serves as the southern entrance to the Suez Canal. Millions of barrels of oil pass through it every day, which means the global economy often depends on waterways narrower than a city highway. But geography alone does not explain ocean control, because humans have also built their own choke points. Perhaps the most famous example is the Panama Canal. Before it existed, ships traveling between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans had to sail around the southern tip of South America, a journey of roughly 13,000 miles. The Panama Canal cut that distance dramatically. Today, around 14,000 ships pass through the canal every year, and every one of them must pass through infrastructure located inside a country smaller than South Carolina. For most of the 20th century, that infrastructure was controlled by the United States, which means the United States effectively controlled one of the most important shortcuts in global trade. Another artificial choke point exists in Egypt, the Suez Canal. This canal connects the Mediterranean Sea directly to the Red Sea. Without it, ships traveling between Europe and Asia would need to sail around Africa, adding roughly 3,500 to 6,000 miles to their journeys. About 12% of global trade passes through this corridor, and when it is blocked, the entire world notices. In 2021, a container ship called the Ever Given became stuck sideways inside the canal. For 6 days, hundreds of ships were trapped on both sides. Global trade slowed. Shipping prices surged. Supply chains across the world felt the impact. A single ship in a single narrow passage was able to disrupt billions of dollars in global trade, because the ocean is divided into legal zones that determine which countries have authority over specific areas. This system was formalized in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Under this framework, coastal countries control waters extending 12 nautical miles from their shores. Beyond that lies another zone called the Exclusive Economic Zone, or EEZ. This zone extends 200 nautical miles from a country's coastline. Within this area, the country has exclusive rights to exploit resources such as fish, oil, and natural gas. This means that while countries do not technically own large portions of the ocean, they still control its economic resources. And because coastlines can stretch thousands of miles, these zones become enormous. The United States has one of the largest EEZs on Earth, larger than the entire land area of the country itself. This zone includes huge portions of the Atlantic, Pacific, and Arctic Oceans. Other countries also possess massive maritime zones: Australia, Canada, Russia, Indonesia. So even though the ocean looks borderless on a map, much of it is already divided by invisible economic borders. Beneath the surface of the ocean lies one of the most important infrastructures on Earth: submarine cables. These cables carry roughly 97% of global internet traffic. Financial transactions, cloud computing, video calls, streaming, international communication. All of it moves through fiber optic cables resting quietly on the seabed. There are more than 400 of these cables spanning over 800,000 miles across the planet. Many of them follow the same corridors as major shipping routes, which means the ocean is not just a transportation network, it is also a communication network. Countries that monitor or protect these cables gain enormous strategic advantages, because damaging just a handful of them could disrupt communications across the entire regions. The modern internet is often imagined in a space, but in reality it lives mostly on the ocean floor. Another way countries control the ocean is through naval power. Unlike land borders, oceans cannot be fenced, but they can be patrolled. Navies project influence far beyond national territory. Aircraft carriers, destroyers, submarines, and surveillance aircraft allow countries to monitor huge areas of the ocean. Because the United States operates the largest navy in the world, it maintains a presence in nearly every major ocean basin. American fleets routinely patrol the Pacific, Atlantic, and Indian Oceans. They escort ships through dangerous regions, monitor strategic choke points, and ensure the major shipping routes remain open, which means that even in international waters, the balance of power still matters. Sometimes controlling the ocean requires controlling very small pieces of land, tiny islands. Under international maritime law, even a small island can generate an exclusive economic zone. This means a remote rock rising out of the ocean can grant control over thousands of square miles of water. Because of this, countries often compete intensely over islands that appear insignificant. A good example is the South China Sea. This region contains hundreds of small islands, reefs, and sandbars. Individually, many are barely large enough to stand on, but collectively they allow countries to claim enormous areas of the ocean. China has taken this concept even further. It has constructed artificial islands by dredging sand from the seabed and building it into permanent land structures. These islands now host airstrips, radar installations, and military bases. From these locations, China can monitor shipping lanes and project power across one of the busiest maritime regions in the world, all from islands that barely existed a decade ago. Despite the immense size of the oceans, global shipping traffic is surprisingly concentrated. Major routes form predictable corridors connecting major ports. One of the busiest maritime highways runs from East Asia across the Pacific to the west coast of North America. Another connects Asia to Europe through the Indian Ocean, the Suez Canal, and the Mediterranean. These routes carry the majority of the world's manufactured goods. Because they are so heavily used, they become strategic priorities for countries that depend on trade. Protecting these routes ensures the steady flow of resources and products across the global economy. In other words, the global economy moves along a handful of invisible highways across the sea. In some cases, control of the ocean turns into open competition. Naval patrols, military exercises, strategic alliances. These are ways countries assert influence in international waters. Freedom of navigation operations are regularly conducted in contested regions. These operations involve naval vessels sailing through areas where another country has attempted to assert excessive control. The goal is simple: demonstrate the international waters remain open to all. Because if one country can close a shipping corridor, it can influence the entire global economy. Most people assume controlling territory is the key to controlling the ocean. But the real secret is much simpler. You do not need to own the ocean. You only need to control the places ships cannot avoid: choke points, canals, islands, naval patrol zones. Once those nodes are controlled, the enormous spaces between them become predictable and manageable. The ocean appears vast, but global trade flows through a surprisingly small number of corridors, and whoever controls those corridors quietly controls the flow of the world. The oceans cover more than 70% of the planet. At first glance, they appear open, borderless, and shared by everyone, but the reality is far more structured. Through geography, law, infrastructure, and military presence, countries have developed ways to exert control over waters they do not technically own. Narrow straits guide global shipping, canals create artificial shortcuts, legal zones define economic authority, navies patrol strategic zones, and islands extend influence across vast regions. Together, these systems transform the ocean from a chaotic wilderness into a managed network, a network that supports the movement of goods, energy, information, and power across the entire world. Which means that even though the ocean officially belongs to no one, its most important corridors are far from uncontrolled.